Okay, so this video is going to be about water transport in plants. Okay, and what that means is how does the plant get all the water from its roots all the way up its stem and through its branches and everything to the ends of its leaves. Okay, against the force of gravity. So let's start with the roots. So that is where the water goes in the first place. Now, one main job of the root is to hold the plant in the ground really firmly and solidly so that it doesn't fall over. And the second job is taking up the water. Right, now how is the root specialised to do this? What the root has is it has very long, thin cells sticking out from its root like this, like fingers into the soil, and they are called root hair cells, and each cell has a root hair sticking out into the soil. And what this does is it increases the surface area of the root so that a lot more minerals and water can get into the root from the soil. Now I can show you how this happens. For example, if you get your fist and it's like this and you put it in some paint, paint can only go around the top of your hand, okay, wherever is touching the bucket of paint. But if you go like this, then the paint can get on all your fingers and inside your hand and everywhere. So the surface that the paint touches is much bigger. And if the paint wanted to get inside you, a lot more would get inside you if you did this rather than if you did this. If you did this, no paint could get through the inside of your hand. Okay, so that is what increasing the surface area means. So a root is like this instead of like this, so that it has a really big surface area so that water and minerals can get inside it through all its walls, and very big surface area that it's got for them to get inside through from the soil. So the second thing to know about what happens in the root is how the water goes from the soil into the inside of the root. Now how it does that is down a concentration gradient. And this means that it goes from a high concentration to a low concentration. So the high concentration of water in the soil, then it starts to diffuse through the membrane, that's the skin of the root, into the inside of the root. Now the skin of the root is called a partially permeable membrane, and that means exactly what it sounds like, which is that it's partially permeable. That means that some things can get inside and other things can't. And it's usually because they have small holes that small molecules can get inside, but large molecules can't pass through. Okay, so water enters the root down a concentration gradient from a high concentration in the soil to a low concentration in the root across a partially permeable membrane of the root. Okay, now as well as the water, the root also needs to absorb nitrates and mineral ions from the soil into the root. Now the plant is able to do this even if there is a higher concentration of nitrates and mineral ions actually inside the root of the plant than in the soil. So if there's a lot more nitrates and minerals inside the root than there actually is in the soil, the plant can still get those little bits of nitrates and mineral ions from the soil. Not through osmosis though, because that will be not along the concentration gradient. It will be against the concentration gradient because it's going from a low to a high concentration. So this time the plant would have to do that through a process called active transport. And active transport means that the plant is actively taking mineral ions and nitrates from the soil into its root, and that process, because it's not along the concentration gradient, because it's against the concentration gradient, that process is called active transport, and it requires ATP. So that process requires ATP and energy. Okay, so now the water has got inside the plant through the roots. The next thing it needs to do is move all the way up the stem of the plant and through its branches to every part that needs the water. Okay, and also the dissolved mineral ions from the soil that are dissolved in the water, they move as well. And the way that it does this is that the water and the mineral ions, they move through these tubes, very long tubes called xylem. Xylem are very long plant cells that died and then made these long, hollow, dead tubes. And that's all it is. And so the water rushes through these and goes to all the different parts of the plant, along with the mineral ions in the water as well. Okay, and if you cut open a tree, you can see that there is all this dead wood, and that's just the xylem in the middle, dead long cells. Okay, now xylem are not the only tubes that there are in plants. There's also another set of tubes, and they're called the phloem, and you need to know about these as well. Now what goes through these tubes is the glucose that the plant makes in its leaves in the sunshine by photosynthesis. This glucose travels to all the different parts of the plant that needs the glucose through a separate tube called phloem. Okay, and these phloem are not dead tubes like the xylem, they're alive tubes. Now there is one last question that we need to answer in this water transport topic, which is the question that we asked at the beginning, which is, how does all this water and mineral ions travel from the roots up the plant stem against the downwards pull of gravity? When gravity is pulling it all down, how does it go up? Okay, now the way it does this is through a process called transpiration. What happens in transpiration is that all the water, or some of the water, starts to evaporate from the plant's leaves, and it evaporates from tiny little holes underneath the plant's leaves called the stomata. Okay, and as it dissolves, it creates something called a concentration gradient down the rest of the plant. What that means is, because the water is going from where there's a high concentration inside the leaf into the air where there's a low concentration, the water leaves suddenly a place in the leaf where there's less water, so it's a low concentration. So then the high concentration behind that place goes to try and fill up that place that was emptied because the water escaped through evaporation. And that carries on happening down the plant. So as water evaporates, the rest of the water in the plant gets sucked up the xylem and the stem to replace the water that's being lost from the leaves. Okay, so as the water evaporates from the leaves, the rest of the water in the plant gets sucked up through the xylem to replace the water that's being lost in the leaves. And that happens because this evaporation of water from the leaves creates a concentration gradient down the plant. Okay, and that process is known as transpiration.